Hi everyone, it's James here, and I'm going to be doing a second tutorial on HTML, this time on tables, divs, and spans, which is basically the spacing tools that we use in HTML, and how we organize the content that we want to go over. This is the step right before we get into CSS, cascading style sheets, and lots of different ways to lay out our content and design different things. Before we can get there, we need to figure out how HTML itself organizes content. So we already learned how pages are organized in general, which is that we have an HTML file with a head and a body. The head has some important stuff in it about the document, and the body has all the content. But how do we organize that content? And as you can see here, we don't really have the tools yet to understand how content is laid out in HTML, and we're going to need some tools to do that in order to define different blocks of content in HTML in order for us to lay it out later and understand better how we can space different bits of content, whether that be images or data or tables or links or anything we want, or text. We're going to be needing some divs, spans, and tables. We're going to start with divs and spans, which are the main tools which HTML will use to space out all of its data. Divs are used for different blocks, as I was talking about, which are basically just different boxes where we want content. On any web page, you can see that there's different boxes, like if you can imagine the Reddit thing, there's like a big giant list of stuff here and another list of stuff there. Every single block here will be a different div. And then inside divs are spans, which are for inline spacings, which is for spacing different things inside of a div. So that's the order we usually go when we do divs and spans, although sometimes they're interchangeable and sometimes you can do things differently depending on whether we're using a div or a span. And usually, though, we're using divs and spans in conjunction with each other. Anyways, here's the syntax for divs and spans here. As you can see, we have a div on the outside. Of course, a body and HTML will be on the very outside, but I didn't show it here for sake of brevity. And inside of the div, we're going to have different spans which space out our content. Now, you don't necessarily have to have these spans here. We can have a div and no spans. And sometimes we can even have spans and no divs, but that's really rare. But in general, we want a div, and inside of a div, we want some spans. And that's basically how we're going to be spacing out data in HTML. Rather than keep talking about this, I think it's better for an example. So over here, I've got some Notepad, which is actually super useful, and I've got our trusty Chrome open with the HTML file that we're editing, which is called spacing tutorial. As you can see here, to review, I have an HTML header, a close HTML tag. Inside that, I have a head and a body. Inside the head, I have a title, which is what appears on our Google Chrome tab. If we go over here, you can see how it's a spacing tutorial up there. I don't know if you can actually see that, but it says spacing tutorial, trust me, as I wrote right over here. As you can see, it's a blank page right now because we have nothing here in our body. So we're going to be changing this right now and adding some content. So what are we going to be putting here? First, let's start with a div. As you can see here, by the way, I'm tabbing out every single time I write a new thing and open a tag. This is just good practice. HTML doesn't read this. I could have written all of this on one line and it would have been the same thing. But this is one way we can organize our information better. It's kind of like a bullet-pointed list where every time we open a new tag, we want to tab once, and every time we close a tag, we want to under tab once. Also, this allows us to use the Notepad's function. This Notepad called Notepad++ lets us close tags that are open and closed just with that little button here. And you can see if we click on it, the entire head goes and hides inside this. And in order to edit it, we can just open it again. That way, if we have a really long HTML document, we can just close different divs that we don't want to see at the moment and stuff. So let's make our first div anyway. We're going to call it division 1. Anyone remember what H1 stands for? It's a header, which is a heading tag, which allows us to define this as the title of our div and say, that heading 1 is the largest heading, heading 2 would be smaller, smaller, and smaller. Oops, I did something wrong there. Sorry about that. Anyways, if we go back to our spacing file here on Chrome, one second, here it is, and we refresh, it's going to say division 1. Pretty simple, right? And it's going to say division 1 really big here in bold because we made it a heading. If we go back into our code, on the other hand, let's put some spans inside this division. Now notice that I'm leaving the header be and not putting that inside a span. I could put a span inside of it. It doesn't do anything different if I do. In general though, if I want to space out content and we want more content in here, I'm going to show you how spans differ from divs. And if we can see here, dang, I'm trying to space it out so it looks good. You always want code to look good, you know? I put some spans inside of this div. If we go back to our Chrome and refresh, you're going to see how it says span 1 and span 2 right underneath this division. Now what happens if I put this division into a span 2? What that would basically mean is to HTML, it's going to read this as, now I have 3 spans instead of 2. And if I do that and save the document and go over here, notice, oh, I didn't change it. Notice, nothing changes at all. There's no difference, because when it comes to spacing things out, spans don't actually do anything inherently. They are used in CSS, and they're used in spacing out text and in organizing our information, but in terms of actual like line breaks, they don't do anything. The only reason division 1 appears large here and is in a line break is because in our code, we put h1 and headers automatically insert line breaks. Spans don't insert line breaks. In fact, if I remove this h1 here and saved it, and then we refresh the page and go over here and look at the page, we're going to see that it looks exactly as it is expected, where we have 3 different things in a row with each other, all spaced out by 1 space, and as if they were all on 1 line. That's because spans don't do anything yet. The way we want to talk about this is, actually let me show you what happens if we have multiple divisions though, before I keep talking. If I have 3 divisions on the other hand, and save it, I didn't put back the h1 here, so it's going to be 1 line here. What happens is that if we go back to our page and refresh, we have separate lines. Divisions do separate lines. As you can see here, they split a line by default. Later, we're going to be able to change our divs and change our spans to do all sorts of crazy things. We're going to be able to make one div tiny, one div have red font. We can have another div be a column on the right. We can have lots of different layout techniques, all using cascading style sheets, CSS, different language for laying out HTML. I can't show you this yet because you haven't learned cascading style sheets, and that will be going over in the next video. And I'm sorry that I can't really show you why spans are important here. Just remember that they're a way for us to organize our content and organize information within a div. Because later we can change our spans, we can change the length of our spans, everything can be changed, and they're all used. And usually when we change things, we're going to want divs and spans in order to organize our content more effectively. Alright, so now that I've gone over divs and spans, we're going to go over the next section, which is tables. Now, as we can see here, tables, as my presentation finally loads. Tables organizes data in a way that's very similar to how tables work in like Microsoft Word. And they make multi-columned web pages, which means that you can have separate columns of a table because, well, that's how tables work. There's no way for HTML to mess that up, right? They can't put a bunch of columns of a table in different lines. That's not going to show up right. So with tables, we're going to be able to organize our information in multiple columns, which is also very useful for things like scoreboards, things if we have different sides of a web page that we want to show. That's where tables come in and are very useful. The syntax is table, th, tr, and td. Those are all of the different tags that we're going to be using. A couple more, likethead and tbody, are sometimes used, but not always. And those are also used if we want to organize our table even more effectively. But for now, just remember table, th, tr, and td. How do we write this in text? Well, I actually wrote a very nice table to show you how to write information about tables. If we move on, oops, I changed one. Right here is my fancy little table of showing how to make tables. You start with a table tag, then TR stands for table row, it makes a new row. TH stands for table heading. TD stands for data. This is very confusing. And that's why we're going to need some more examples. So we're going to go over here and save this file, but we're not going to really be needing any of this. So I'm going to delete it and go back from the beginning from scratch. First, I'm going to need a div to put this table in that I'm about to create, because every time you want to put content on a page, we always want to put it inside a div. So I'm going to close this div and put it in here. What this means is that I've made a new division, and inside this division I'm going to put a table. Remember, divisions don't mean only text. You can put divisions anywhere. You can make divisions set up into images, into links. To remind you guys, image is this, and link is this. If you want more, you can go into my last video in order to better understand what images and links are and how we use them. But for now, let's make a table. So the first thing we're going to do is, as it read before in that presentation, table, right here. So we're going to go over here and start making that table. I'm going to close this tab here. So congratulations, you made your table. Now we're going to be defining this table in a different way though. Excuse me here. Let's say I wanted a table with 3 rows and 2 columns. The way we want to show this is first we're going to be organizing our table using rows, and then as we space out our rows, we're going to be putting different columns in. So first we're going to start with rows. So as you can see here, I'm making 3 rows. TR stands for table row, as I explained earlier. Now I've created 3 rows in our table. If I write 1, 2, and 3, let's see what it looks like when we go over to the page. Oh, this is still not refreshed. As you can see, it says 1, 2, and 3. And they're not spaced out at all. Why is this? Because when we write information, they don't actually understand how 1, 2, and 3 work without the next tag that we're going to be needing. So when we go over here to our information, we're going to be using the next tag that we have here. Let's start with table heading, and then we'll move on to table data. Heading allows us to put a little, heading inside of a table. For example, if I want the first row to be name, the second row to be grade, and the third row to be school, then I've just made 3 table headers. If we refresh the page and look at it, it now looks like this. Notice that 2 and 3 just randomly appear before name, grade, school. That's because HTML doesn't understand how we put a 2 inside of a row without the next thing that we're going to be needing to use, without enclosing it in something called table data, which, if we go back over here, I wrote TD for all of our data. So we're going to be needing to enclose our table row inside with some data. So since we have 3 headers, it's going to create a 3-column table. So we're going to be needing 3 bits of data about every single one of these. So I'm going to copy paste this 3 times. And as you can see here, I can put my name here, James, my grade here, which is 12, and my school here, which is Newton South. And if we save this information, what do you think it's going to look like over here on our page? Well, if we go over here, we're going to see that it looks like this. Name, grade, school. And it spaces it out just right so that we have as much information as possible within one spacing. Later we're going to realize how we can make this have a border. We're going to be able to space things out. We're going to make it colorful. We can do lots of things with different rows and columns. But for now, it's still a list of stuff. But notice that we do have separate lines here. We have separate columns. If we go back to our code and I write something here, for example, I make my grade like infinitely large, I'm a really old student here, and refresh, you're going to see that grade automatically spaces out so that we have a larger space for the grade. Also, you can see that name, grade, and school are bolded automatically because they're headers. The same way if we put h1 here, it would be different. Now if we go back to our code, I'm going to make this back into like, sensible code. Let's say I wanted another row. See how I put another row here? Well, I'm going to copy paste this so that it's a little bit easier to write our code, our table entries. Let's say I want another person named Bob, and he's in grade 11 and he goes to Newton North. Well, our table can handle that just fine, and it writes a second column. So that's how you make a table in HTML. Very simple. I know there's a lot of different T's here that are hard to understand, so I'm going to go over them one more time and make sure we understand it very well. We have a table. Every single row of the table needs to have an open TR and a closed TR, so that's an entire table row. Every single header inside a table, so that's the heading of the name, needs to have TH and then name, closed TH. So every column that's created is going to be one set of these. So this is the first column, this is the second column, this is the third column. I'm going to make a new table actually in order to show this a little bit more clearly. So I make a new table down here. And I'm going to call this column 1. I'm going to call this column 2. And we're going to call this column 3. And then I can put this as row 1, and this is row 2. If we look at the pictures, I'm going to put like random letters here in order to explain that this is where data goes. And if we go over here and refresh, column 1, column 2, column 3, row 1, row 2. This is actually row 1 technically, because if we go back to our code, this is a row, but I'm not going to write that because that would just be more confusing. That's how you would make a table. TD is table data, which means that it is what entries we're putting inside that table. Now let's go back to that PowerPoint and better understand what I was trying to get at when I showed this. Each one of these is a start of a row. Each one of these is a closing of a row. Sorry, this is the closing of a row. Each one of these is a header. So it's a heading for each of the information. Next, we have the data of the table, which is here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces of data. Each one of these will have a TD. So in general, TR, TH, TD, and table itself. And if we go back to our code, it completely represents that. And if we go back to our information here, it's also the same thing. So that's really all there is to tables and to divs, to spans. That's the different spacing techniques that we're going to be needing in order to move on into more complex topics such as cascading style sheets and styles in our next video. So I hope you guys had fun reading this, understanding it hopefully. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me, comment below, anything at all. So thanks, and I'll see you next time.